Hey, this week on the 167, we're talking about walking the line and how do we close the gap between the person that God wants us to be and the person that we are now. Welcome to the 167.
1, 2, 3, let's go!
Hey, welcome back to the 167. I'm here with Pastor Rick George,
Hey, good morning.
Senior Pastor of New Life Community Church. I'm Lucas Motley, the Discipleship Pastor, and welcome to the 167.
Yeah, welcome. Someone just yesterday, I think, day before yesterday, said, "What's the name of that podcast again?"
The
So
167.
I said, "The 167." They're like, "Oh, yeah. So where can you watch that? Where do you get that?" So
It's on, like, you might be listening to us on iTunes right now or maybe on Spotify. We're available on Audible, Spotify, Apple Music, or Apple Podcasts. We're available on YouTube if you want to watch the video, and Right Now Media if you are a Right Now Media subscriber through our church.
all right, there you go. So I'm like, the places where you watch those kinds of things.
Yeah. I think you should definitely watch the video, though, because sometimes there are visual jokes that don't necessarily make it onto the audio podcast.
There you go.
Sometimes my outfit is just a visual joke. I don't know. This week, we started a new series, Walk the Line. And
It was amazing. Johnny Cash was here.
Johnny Cash showed up in person, back from the
that'd be-
grave.
That'd be really weird.
Resurrection Sunday. No.
I have no idea why I just kind of felt compelled to sing a bit of Johnny Cash, and
Sometimes there's just a song in your heart. You gotta,
I guess I don't know.
I
So,
thought I had figured out that I was in a musical or something. Like people just spontaneously bursting into song.
we should do a whole sermon series, the musical.
Yeah.
and it's just a
We could call there you go, sermon series the musical. Be like, come out, and my first point is Jesus loves you. Jesus,
yeah,
people just
go-
like,
the choir comes out.
yeah, I like it.
I don't. No, that's
come
that's
on.
not going to work.
So this week, though, we were talking about kind of righteous living and coming into walking that line with Jesus. And right out of the gate, I thought this was fire. You come out and you said, hey, listen, there's the person that God has made you to be. And then there's the person that you are right now and you're living right now. And you said there's a gap. And you asked us the question, are you trying to manage the gap or close the gap? And I was like, I literally said to myself, I was like, oh. So when you're talking about that, the way I understood it was that where it's, if I go, okay, I'm not living righteously in this part of my life, and I've compartmentalized it, and I'm just like, well, yeah, I'll do this and this and this, but this is kind of my pet project of sin, or I'm maybe not living up to this standard, and so I'm just gonna try and live in that rather than become the person that God took me to.
I mean, just put all the cards on the table. Everyone wrestles with trying to manage that gap at some level. We know it, and I've said this before in messages. I don't need someone to tell me what my downfall is. I don't need someone to point out my sin most of the time. I'm aware of it. I live with it. I understand it. I just don't want to change it. Like I get it. It's just too hard to actually change. So I'll try to manage it. I'll try to get a little better. I don't want it to just dominate me, so I'll cut back a little bit. That's all in an attempt to manage the problem, not to kind of close the gap, not to eliminate the problem. So, the question being, is it possible to get rid of that gap? Well, that would be called perfection. And one day we will stand in front of Christ and we will be like him and we'll see him and that gap will be closed. But until that day, I personally don't believe that we can reach that place of perfection in this life. That does not mean we should not be pursuing that and trying to close the gap and addressing those issues.
Right.
I don't know. Do you have issues? Do you have
None whatsoever.
None? So, yeah, if you want to know how to get to that place, talk to somebody besides me. But
My
but
issue,
Lucas is there, right? No, not really.
My issue, and the thing that always scares me is I always think about this in the sense where Jesus talks about the by fire, and there's a place in the Bible where it talks about, yeah, you're going to stand before the feet of Jesus and you're going to be perfected, but it's again through this kind of burning away of all the things that don't matter in your life. And I'm like, I always look at that as, oh, this is going to be painful. It's like, this is going to be something, if I quit a habit in my life, I'm going to feel it. I'm going to feel it in my flesh. I'm going to feel it in my schedule. I'm going to feel it in, the sacrifices that I have to make in order to do that. And I think that's always the thing that scares me about closing that gap is the pain that's associated with it and who I'm going to be on the other side of that.
Yeah, it looks different for everyone. Like, we all have different things we struggle with, but for the person who really struggles with anger or forgiving another person, like, we try to manage that. We'll say, well, I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to let it go. But, one day they're going to hear so we manage it. I'm going to get back at them at some point, or I'll never let them do that again. I've got a close eye on this heart of mine,
Close.
So it's like, no, I'm going to watch them, and I'm suspicious of them. And we don't close that gap and say, I want to be like Christ. I want to extend grace and mercy and forgiveness. We just push it off to the side. And then we go about life trying to manage that anger emotion or that feeling of resentment towards them. Or it could be any number of things, and some type of habit or addiction where, like, I don't really want to give that completely to Jesus. I'm just going to, I know I've got a drinking problem. I'm going to cut back some. I want to drink less. I'm going to try to manage this instead of saying, all right, this is a problem. How do I close that gap? Right? So it's something different for every person.
Well, and I think there's always this, I think we've talked about this in the podcast before. I always just love this example because I thought it was so brilliant. But Jimmy Evans, who I listen to occasionally, and he talks about that thing where he says that I was a smoker, and I was literally smoked a pack of cigarettes, and he goes, and then God convicted me about it, and he said, I am not a smoker. And he went to work the next day, and they're like, hey, do you want a cigarette? And he goes, no, I'm a non-smoker.
Yeah.
And they're like, we just saw you smoke a cigarette. And he goes, and when I went to a restaurant, they would say, do you want to sit in the smoking section or the non-smoking section? And he would just reply, I'm a non-smoker.
Yeah.
And they would take him to the non-smoking section. And he's like, and he goes, and I had a cigarette some of those times, he goes, but I would be having the cigarette going, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm a non-smoker. Yeah. And I think that when you're challenging us to that, where it's like, how do I close that gap? And I'm going, like, how do I really buy into that? And I think that's, and I'm just kind of like wrestling with that in my head where I'm saying, like, if it's that, if I want to quit drinking soda, if I want to work out more, how do I not go, yeah, I go to the gym and I hate it and it sucks. But to go, no, I am, I'm a fitness person. I'm into fitness, and it's like, they're looking at my body physique and going, you're into fitness? And I'm like, oh, I love fitness. I'm super into fitness, and it's like, how do I, to claim the identity almost of Christ, where it's like that, like, no, I'm the righteousness of Christ. I'm the purity of Christ. I am, God's child, God's adopted child. Why would I do that when I'm God's child?
Yeah, in my mind, I'm trying to think back over the course of my life, in the past and even more recently, things that I've struggled with, things that I have struggled with, things that I found, like, I overcame that, I found great victory, and then taking that and comparing it to things that not so much, like I've not overcome them, or I still struggle with that, or it was more difficult. And what are the similarities and what are the differences in my life? And I think it comes down to that mindset and the heart issue. So the heart and mind coming together to say, okay, I am willing to let this go.
Right.
And I have a desire in my heart to walk with Jesus. Can I walk closely with him and at the same time do this, think this, have this in my life? And in those times when I've said, I can't walk with Jesus and have this too, and I want my heart and my mind to be in unison here, and I'm going to give this up, then I find success. But there have been times, and it's dumb. Like, right. It makes no sense. But in my head, I will acknowledge this is not healthy for me. But in my heart, I make a decision. I'm not going to give it up.
Right.
Um,
Well, and tell me a little bit about that, because you brought up this really excellent point where you said surrender is about giving away possession. And so I know a lot of times, like, we say that so often in the church that I'm afraid that sometimes it can become platitudinal when we say you got to give it to Jesus. It's, you have to surrender, you have to do this. You talked about waving the white flag. But when you talked about that, it's like, no, you have to actually give up possession of the thing. Like, you can't be like, sure, this is yours, but I'm going to hold on to it. Like, tell me a little bit about that. Like, how can I fully give up possession of the thing that's holding me back?
all right, I'll just give you like a real example of, and it may seem trivial or insignificant, and ultimately it is. Like, it is not a big deal. But so for me, I've been in this process for a long time of trying to figure out Facebook. Not how it works, but
Why
how
people
how it's working in my life.
Oh, okay.
All right. So why do I want it? Why do I keep it? Why do I spend so much time looking through it? What is it that has me connected to Facebook? I can tell you, I like to, post things about the church, and I like to, keep track of church people, and it lets me know. Yes, that's a part of it, but there's something else. There's something else going on. And so I've been wrestling with this idea of, I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to get rid of Facebook. I don't need it in my life.
Right.
That's my head. Like, I know it. And then my heart says, do you really want to just get rid of it? Can you just not look at it? Can you just, like, how about we just set some parameters and say, don't look at Facebook or get on and do things more than, 10 minutes a day. And so the message that I preached on Sunday, a lot of it was in reference to some of that struggle for me of saying, all right, well, now I'm not surrendering that to Jesus. I'm not trying to close the gap I'm just trying to manage. Like, I'm not going to give it up.
Right.
Like, that'd be crazy. Like, why would anybody?
Everybody's on Facebook.
Yeah, everybody. Like, I'm going to be like, I have to have Facebook. So I'm not going to, like, do something crazy and radical, like get rid of it. I'm going to manage it. So, yes, does it seem trivial? And in that one situation, and that's just one of many things that we struggle with, but that's the process. Intellectually, I know, yes, this is a problem, and it's been a problem. So let's just get rid of it. Really? How about if we just manage it a little bit?
Yeah.
And it could be, again, the spectrum is so wide of things that it entails in each one of our lives.
Well, I just think that the idea is very countercultural in the sense that our culture is very much, I have to get mine, I have to own everything, I have to do this, and it's like, even when we're, it's the slay queen, just do whatever you want to do kind of thing, and you shouldn't ever have to give up anything, right? We don't live in a minimalist culture. We don't live in a give up culture. It's like, it's almost the sense of, like, if you're struggling with your weight, you don't have to do it. Like, you don't have to change at all. What has to happen is society has to change and readjust the beauty standards. Yeah. And, if you want to be a drug addict, that's fine. What we really have to do is we have to change the laws. Like, we're very much in a culture right now, I feel like, where we shouldn't have to give up anything. Like, you are just, like, fine, just the way you are. You are, and I laugh because, like, we were, and granted, like, I'm teaching people. We were at our Freedom Ministry, and I was working with some young kids, and one of the girls said that she struggles with feeling like she's enough, and almost just, reactively, one of the girls said, "Girl, you're enough," and I went, "No, you're not."
Yeah.
And they were like, they turned around and looked at me like I had, like, kicked their dog, and I was just like, let me take you. And I can't remember where I went. It was like Ephesians or Galatians, but it literally says that the God of the universe there's a God that created the universe and he created everything in it, and he wants to take care of you. And I was like, I'm like, this is the Bible is literally telling you that you are not enough. Like that, whatever it is in your life that you think that you get to keep, it's like, no, 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 no. Like that's not what this is about. This isn't about, you should keep all your stress and anxiety because that's just you and that's who you are. And, like Slay Queen. And it's just like, no, no, no. You have to empty yourself.
Yeah, it's that indulgence. So, like, we like to indulge ourselves, not to deny ourselves. But Jesus, like, plain and simple, what's he say? All right, here's the deal, guys. You don't have to follow me. I get it. Lots of choices out there. You can do whatever you want. I love how he puts it, if any of you desires to follow after me,
right,
this is what it's going to take. And he starts right out of the gate. Deny yourself. You think, well, how does that apply to us today? Was it easier for them? Harder for them? I think it was the same.
Starbucks.
Yeah, they didn't have Starbucks. I think it was the same. Different things that they struggled with. They didn't have Facebook. We do. They didn't have some of the things that we do, but they still had to deny their self, their desires, and to come to grips with the fact that, I have to give up some things. I can't do all, be all, have all. It's not all about me. It's about him. Mm-hmm. That's a struggle. And we don't like it. I don't like it.
Well, we were just talking a little bit before this where I always laugh. There was a scene in Parks and Rec where every year two of the characters they would do Treat Yourself. And they're like, Treat Yourself 2011. And it was like, so it was like a day where they just indulged themselves. And it would be like, do you want a snack? Treat yourself. But we still have that culture where it's, Krista was laughing at it. She called it little treat culture. And so it's like, oh, I finished a task. I get a little treat. Oh, I did my laundry today. I deserve a little treat. And we run to Starbucks and buy a $10
Get to reward
drink.
ourselves.
Yeah. But denial, and even something like fasting or something that's physically denying something in our lives, it's very counterculture. But talk to me a little bit about what that has to do with our spiritual existence, because I get this question so many times where people are like, sure, I fast, but the understanding about fasting a lot of times, or even just any kind of denial, it's like, I'm going to show some self-control in this area. I'm going to deny myself this thing, even if it's not a little treat. Sometimes it's denying yourself, that pity party or whatever. But it's if I live in this denial culture, what does that denying my physical flesh have to do with my spiritual life?
Yeah, so they go hand in hand. So you mentioned fasting. So that's a great example of surrendering a part of your life physically, right? Giving up eating 3 meals a day or whatever it might be. So I'm going to deny myself that meal. But then that comes along with, I'm going to replace that. So I'm going to deny my flesh, but I'm going to feed my spirit. Okay, so I think the tendency and the thing that comes easier for us is, okay, I'm going to deny myself. I'm going to fast. And then we curl up in a ball and say, this is so hard. And then
we rip our clothes and put ashes on our head.
And so then we don't do anything. We just sit and try to bare knuckle our way through it and endure this awful day that I had to skip lunch because I'm so spiritual, and I'm going to sacrifice and surrender my life to Jesus and complain and moan and groan the entire time, whether it's out loud to other people or internally to ourselves, that this is so hard, this is so hard. But the idea of fasting is I'm going to deny my body and my flesh, and at the same time, I'm going to use that time to feed my spirit. So I'm going to indulge myself in God's word and in his presence and make it about him, not about me. And if you do one without the other, like if you just say, I'm going to deny myself, then it just becomes an exercise in how awesome I am and I can go without eating.
Right.
And it doesn't really fulfill the purpose of closing that gap and walking more closely with Jesus. It just proves that I can skip lunch.
Well, and I think that gap, oftentimes, the major reason for that gap is our flesh. It's our flesh or our worldly mindset, where it's like, yes, like I would say probably, 4 out of 5, 9 out of 10, where it's like, you're sitting there going, okay, here's the road that I should be walking. Here's the line that I should walk. But really, I'm walking over here. And most of the time, I would say there is some kind of physical indulgence that goes with that, whether it be sexual, whether it be, like the little treat culture, whether it be psychological. There's something that's indulgent in our flesh. And fasting is a way to tell your flesh, I'm in charge. Like my spirit, the Holy Spirit that lives in me is in charge. And even though you want me to be over here indulging, I will deny myself and come over here. And a lot of times, like sometimes those are big issues. It can be something, premarital sex. I deal with, the 18 to 25-year-olds. So that's a big thing. Like once you hit your teenage years, your hormones go crazy. And the idea of waiting until marriage when you don't know when that is, that is daunting. And so I'm like, if you can't say no to Starbucks, if you can't, control your budget, if you can't say no to a candy bar, how are you going to say no when you are in that moment of temptation with something that has been building up for years?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you can't say no to some small indulgence in life, then how do you think you're going to say yes to taking up the cross?
Right.
And walking with Jesus on this journey of death to self.
Right.
And they go together. So it was intentional. It wasn't like he was like, oh, okay, how can I word this in a way that's palatable? How can I word this in a way that they'll just accept it and say, oh, is that all it takes? He's like, yeah, there's no way to candy coat this. So, all right, guys, again, I know that some of you have questions and you may not want to do this because you're going to have to deny yourself. And so I would say that same thing to our culture. You don't have to go to church. You don't have to follow Jesus. You can go do whatever you want. Right? But if you want to follow Jesus, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him. If you don't, choose another way, but be prepared for whatever consequences might come down the road.
Well, and you mentioned this briefly in your message, but you said the word satisfied. And I just thought that is such an incredible concept of that God satisfies. Like you don't think of that. If you deny yourself food, you're hungry. And yet, but if you're satisfied with God, then you don't have to be satisfied by food. And I was just thinking about that because I was like, one of my favorite jokes of all time in the Chosen series is like season 1. It's like the last episode where he's talking to the woman at the well, and they, the disciples go to get food, and they come back, and they're like, here, do you want to eat? And he goes, no, I have food that you don't know about. And it's this really kind of spiritual moment where he's telling them like, to do the work of my Father is satisfying to me so that I don't have to satisfy my flesh. And Andrew just goes, who brought you food?
Yeah. Like what?
Where? I have food you don't know about. It's like, who brought you food? Like, did you have a roll hidden in your robes? Like,
did you Uber eat something?
Yeah, like you were holding out on us. We were all starving, And he's like, no, it's to do the will of my Father. And it's like to live in that space where you are satisfied with the Spirit and to do the work of God. And you don't have to get your satisfaction from work, and you don't have to get it from a relationship, but you're just satisfied with the Spirit. I think that is something that helps you close the gap where walking the line is satisfying in its own, that you don't have to come out here to get something else that you're missing.
And I think again, just what I've noticed in my own life and in culture is as long as we can see the line, like I'm pretty close to the line, like I'm closer to the line than that person, then we're good. Instead of say, no, I want to walk that line. This is the line that he drew. This is the straight path to the cross, and I'm going to follow him. I'm going to be on that line. Not, I can see it. I'm good.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I wanted to touch on, because I thought it was really great, was you said that we are free to choose, but we're not free of the consequences. And I feel like that doesn't jive with so many people's theology of, I give my life to Christ, and therefore I will never experience bad things ever again. And if I do, it's through no fault of my own, and I will just simply pray, and God will fix that for me. And it's like, how should we kind of look at that differently or behave differently?
Yeah, so I don't resonate with that theology. In fact, in the message, I said that one of the ways we can determine if we're in management mode is when we fall into that I'll ask God for help when I need him. Like it's Like I'll call on God when I need him mode. The rest of the time, I'm just going to do what I want to do. And we've all slipped into that, and we've made terrible choices, and then we start to suffer the consequences of that bad choice, and then we're like, oh God, just take care of this bad situation.
Right.
Like I know I was drinking too much and I got in the car and now the cop pulled me over. Oh Lord, get me, let him just give me a warning. I pray, Lord, if you just take this away and I don't get a DUI, I'll serve you. Just get, and it's like, no, that's a consequence of a bad choice.
It's like, we're not saying Jesus take the wheel before we ever put the car in park.
Yeah.
We're saying Jesus take the wheel when we are spinning out of control down a hill. And we're like, at that point, we're like, God, if you want to put me back on the road. And he's like, are you kidding?
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that there are people who feel like, hey, I'm a child of God. I'm protected. I just go and live life and he guides my steps. And and I understand that. I mean, that scripture does say that he directs our paths, but that happens as we surrender control of our life and we're like, Lord, what do you want me to do?
Right.
And
you can hear from him either directly or you can look in his word.
Yeah.
And you can see that wisdom piece.
Yeah. And so the theology that you're referencing that a lot of people have in our culture today is a theology that God just always says yes. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
He always says yes to the things that I want. Like it.
God
if that's
wants me
how
to
you
be happy.
Yeah. That's how you feel. Well, that's God, and that makes you feel satisfied. Well, that's God, and you feel happy with it. Well, that's God. You lean into that because that's God's plan for you, and that's what He is like. I don't think that that's exactly true, but again, you're free to believe whatever you want to believe. And you're free to choose whatever you want to choose. You're also going to have the rewards of the consequences. You're not free to choose those. And I know that that's in contradiction to some theology, and I'm okay with that.
But I think it's kind of lazy theology in the sense of, so a meme that I see all the time on like Reels and TikTok and stuff like that is there's this guy that he's literally sitting there and goes like, Lord, why do you give me all your toughest battles? And it goes, the guy, it's the perspective of God. He goes, you are sitting on the toilet because you went to Taco Bell at 2 a.m.,
right.
like at 2 a.m. and ate 4 burritos, don't look at me about the, and I'm going, that seems like a silly example, but we have spent our lives giving into our flesh and we spend time, like coveting and lusting and, gluttoning ourselves on different things. And then it's like, like I've had people that do that where somebody died, of a heart attack or they had a heart attack and they're like, why would God allow this? And I'm like, dude, you eat 4 cheeseburgers, like you clogged your arteries. Like God gave you a perfectly good working heart. You clogged your arteries. This is something. And so like, that doesn't explain, obviously there are things that people have heart defects and things like that, which are deeper theological wrestle. But like, sometimes we are just in the midst of our own consequences. And I believe that God can work those things for good. And I believe that part of freedom is, working your way out of it. But sometimes it's not a pill that it's not just like God's like, fine, miraculous healing every time that you get yourself into this and we're just done.
Yeah. And so ultimately, kind of to bring this to closure, when you think about management or closing the gap, right? Managing the gap, closing the gap, our heart should always be, I want to close that gap. Is it going to happen overnight? No. Does that mean that in a lot of ways we're managing that? Yes. I mean, it's a both and. So in my desire to close the gap, there are some things that I have to manage along the way, but I can't manage them effectively if I'm not willing to surrender them completely, right? So if you want to manage it effectively, you have to surrender it completely and have a desire to say, I want to follow you. I want to walk that line, right? And to get from here to there is a little bit of a process, right? So,
well, we'll be unpacking that more this series. Come and join us on Sunday morning, and we'll see you back here next week on the 167. If you enjoyed this episode of the 167, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, get notified, leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Tell all your friends to listen as well. Make sure you go over to newlifegardener.com and check out all that we have to offer as a church, and check out our messages online as well. Thanks for listening.